Come closer, you unpredictable, unshakable presence in a world that never prepared itself for someone built like you. Sit with me for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you isn't speculation, isn't intuition, isn't wishful thinking. It's a revelation that has already begun reshaping the terrain around you. And once you hear it, you won't unhear it. Something erupted behind your back. Something you didn't orchestrate, didn't anticipate, didn't push into motion. Truth didn't leak out quietly. It blasted through the walls like the universe finally got impatient and decided to speak on your behalf. People you've never met, people who owe you nothing, people with zero emotional ties to your story. They saw something. They saw everything. And now they're stepping into the battlefield with a boldness that should make you pause. Because strangers don't intervene unless the truth is so loud. It forces their hand. They are dissecting someone's behavior, dragging every toxic move into the open, tearing apart every performance, every contradiction, every detail that once slipped through unnoticed. And they're doing it loudly, publicly, sharply, like they've been waiting for this moment. The mask slipped. No, it didn't slip. It collapsed, and the collapse was witnessed by the worst possible audience. People who can't be manipulated, can't be guilt-tripped, can't be emotionally bullied into defending the wrong side. Neutralize are the most dangerous judges, and those neutralized turned toward the situation, saw the cracks, and immediately recognized the pattern you tried so hard to understand alone. Listen carefully. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't divine timing, sprinkled with wishful thinking. This was pressure building behind the scenes for months, maybe years, until the truth reached a breaking point. It takes a lot for uninvolved observers to choose a side, but it takes even more for them to choose yours so decisively, especially when they had no obligation to. They weren't persuaded, they weren't manipulated, they weren't influenced by loyalty. They just watched everything unfold. And the truth was so self-evident that their instincts activated before their logic even caught up. You want to know what triggered this eruption? It wasn't the lie itself. It wasn't the manipulation. It wasn't the twisted narrative that was painted around you. It was the moment the illusion broke. The moment the person who wronged you tripped over their own storyline in front of people who had no reason to forgive the inconsistency. All it took was a single detail out of place, one slip, one crack, one reaction too extreme, one explanation too polished, one timeline too conveniently vague. And the room changed. People glanced at each other. Something didn't match. Something felt constructed. Something smelled rehearsed. And humans may ignore many things, but they never ignore a mask breaking. It activates something ancient in them. A primal awareness that says, this isn't real, something is off. Pay attention. That's when strangers became investigators. That's when witnesses became analysts. That's when passive bystanders became defenders. You didn't have to speak. You didn't have to argue. You didn't have to clear your name. Truth spoke for you, and those with no personal stake in your life carried it forward like it belonged to them. They began pointing out contradictions you overlooked. They started noticing behaviors you normalized. They began connecting dots you weren't emotionally available to connect at the time. Because when you were inside the situation, you were drowning in confusion, trying to decode intentions that didn't want to be decoded. But strangers saw it with unsettling clarity. They watched the person who targeted you try to maintain control, and they saw the desperation behind the performance. They saw the exaggerated reactions, The defensive outbursts, the misplaced confidence, the eagerness to play victim when accountability approached. They saw the fear behind the theatrics and the cracks in the story. They saw the reflex to deflect, the urgency to blame, the bending of facts, the strategic oversharing, the sudden emotional spikes that felt less like honesty and more like a tactic. And the funniest part? Your silence hurt them more than your words ever could. Because while you were quiet, composed, rebuilding yourself privately, the other side was unraveling loudly, publicly, sloppily. You didn't need to expose anything. They did it themselves. People watched the imbalance and understood instantly. One side looked grounded, stable, consistent. The other looked frantic, erratic, suspiciously rehearsed. Human intuition isn't perfect, but it's accurate enough to recognize when someone's behavior doesn't align with their claims. This is why strangers stepped in, not because they adore you, not because they sympathize with your pain, but because the situation offended their intelligence. It insulted their pattern recognition. It activated their desire for clarity. And once clarity arrived, they championed you without hesitation, because the truth was too obvious to ignore. Let's drag this deeper. You're dealing with someone who thought their mask was secured with bolts, not realizing it was attached with loose tape. They believed their charisma, their stories, their emotional theatrics would always overshadow your quiet truth. They assumed the public would automatically side with them. They believed the performance would hold. But a performance only works when the audience is passive, and the audience watching them wasn't passive. They noticed tone inconsistency, mismatched emotions, curated narratives, exaggerated innocence. They noticed the way this person talked about you, with too much certainty and too little evidence. They noticed the over-explanations, the unnecessary details, the deflections disguised as clarity. Strangers aren't emotionally invested enough to be deceived. That's what destroyed everything. And now the public is dragging their behavior into daylight with a vengeance your heart never had the energy to unleash. They're replaying conversations in their minds. They're comparing stories. They're realizing they were manipulated too, indirectly, unknowingly, unintentionally. And nothing makes people angrier than realizing they were used to reinforce a lie. Your truth isn't just personal anymore. It's communal. It's shared. It belongs to everyone who feels insulted that they were expected to believe fiction wrapped in panic. This is why the situation is exploding. People are defending you not gently, not politely, but with the force of individuals who feel personally disrespected by the deception. They're not whispering. They're not hinting. They're not attempting diplomacy. They're calling out the behavior openly. They're labeling the patterns accurately. They're describing the toxicity with words you were too exhausted to say. They're standing in front of you like a shield made of pure exposure. And here's the part you need to understand. You didn't win because you fought. You won because you didn't play the game. And people respect that more than they respect anything else. Your refusal to smear, your refusal to retaliate, your refusal to join the chaos made the contrast blindingly obvious. You were stable, they were spiraling, and people always trust the one who isn't desperate to prove a point. What's happening now is a form of public correction. The truth created a demand for accountability, and society is delivering it ruthlessly. Voices are speaking on your behalf because the situation disgusted them. Eyes are watching closely because the unraveling is fascinating. Some are defending you out of outrage, some out of principle, some because they saw a reflection of their own past in your experience. The reason doesn't matter. the effect does. The person who tried to distort your reality now has none left. Their credibility is dust. Their mask is gone. Their patterns are exposed. Their intentions are dissected. Their behavior is being read like a confession. People aren't just seeing what happened, they're explaining it to each other. And the momentum is just beginning. Because once people taste truth, they want more. Once they recognize manipulation, they call out every trace of it. Once they pull one thread, the entire fabric unravels. This isn't a single moment. This is the start of a chain reaction, the kind that doesn't pause once activated, the kind that spreads until every piece of the puzzle is visible. Now watch what happens next. The first wave of exposure wasn't the real impact. That was just the ignition point, just the spark that hit the dry field. What's unfolding now is the wildfire, the unstoppable cascade, where everyone who previously stayed silent begins speaking with a confidence they didn't know they had. Because truth does something powerful to the human mind. It emboldens. It gives people permission to say what they were already thinking. And once people feel that permission, they don't whisper anymore. They project. They clarify. They dissect with precision, sharp enough to pierce illusions that once felt untouchable. People who barely know the situation are suddenly quoting behavior patterns, like they've studied psychology for decades. They're pointing out signs, decoding contradictions, replaying interactions they had no emotional attachment to. It's almost comical, the way strangers become experts once they realize someone tried to feed them a fabricated narrative. Nothing irritates the collective mind more than feeling disrespected by lies. And that irritation is what fuels the uprising happening around you. This is where the second wave starts. People begin remembering small things they dismissed before. The odd tone, the misplaced confidence, the tiny inconsistencies, the dramatic overreactions, the rehearsed victimhood, the exaggerated claims, the moments where something felt off but they couldn't articulate why. Now, with the truth out, all those fragments click into place like pieces snapping together in a puzzle they didn't even know they were solving. Someone says, "Wait, didn't they say this earlier?" But now they're saying the opposite. Another adds, "That's strange, because I remember them reacting weird when I mentioned you." Someone else chimes in, "I always felt like something about them didn't match their story." And then another voice, sharper, more irritated, "I knew they were lying, I just didn't have proof." This is it, the moment when the mask is no longer just slipping. It's being ripped apart by the collective recognition that the person who wronged you never deserved the benefit of the doubt they were given. And what's worse for them, they can't intervene. They can't stop the narrative now that the audience has taken control of it. The story isn't theirs anymore. It belongs to everyone analyzing it, discussing it, dragging it. Because the truth isn't quiet now. It's trending. What you have to understand is this. Once the truth becomes communal, it becomes weaponized. It becomes a shared project, a shared mission, a shared outcry. People feel personally invested in correcting the wrong. They feel responsible for calling it out. They feel obligated to protect you, because the situation crosses into something bigger than your personal experience. It becomes symbolic. It becomes a case study in how deception collapses under observation. And you become the reference point everyone uses to talk about how people hide ugliness behind carefully polished presentations. The third wave, that's where things get interesting. Because as more people begin defending you, more people also begin examining the behavior of the one who targeted you. They evaluate that person not based on their words, but their reactions. They watch how they respond to being questioned. They watch how they handle discomfort. They watch how they react to being confronted. And those reactions betray them faster than any evidence ever could. Every defensive outburst becomes a confession. Every exaggeration becomes a tell. Every meltdown becomes data. Every attempt to redirect attention becomes suspicious. Truth has a funny way of shining brightest through the reactions of the guilty. And here's the part that should make you sit with amusement. Strangers aren't just defending you. They're mocking the behavior of the one who deceived them, not cruelly, not maliciously, but with that playful sharpness humans use when they realize they've witnessed something ridiculous. They call out their theatrics, their inconsistencies, their dramatic storytelling. Some even joke about it, not because your situation was funny, but because the performance was so unbelievable in hindsight that the humor writes itself. Why were they so dramatic about everything? Why did they always talk in circles? Why did they act like every inconvenience was a tragedy? Why did they lie with the confidence of someone who forgot reality has witnesses? Why did they add so many unnecessary details? Who talks like that? These comments sting the toxic person far more than any insult, because nothing wounds a manipulator more than being seen as laughable. They crave control, not exposure. They crave sympathy, not skepticism. They crave validation, not analysis. They want people to feel sorry for them, not question them. And right now, they're getting exactly what they feared most: neutrality turning against them. Because public opinion is shifting with force. Here's the chain reaction unfolding under the surface. First, strangers question their story. Then acquaintances remember odd interactions. Next, the ones who once supported them begin stepping back. Then the ones who stayed neutral begin choosing sides. And finally, the ones who doubted you realize they were wrong, and they begin defending you, fiercely, openly, almost aggressively. That's the wave that breaks people. The fourth wave: consequences, not legal consequences yet, social consequences, psychological consequences, reputation consequences, the kind that dismantle someone's entire strategy without anyone lifting a finger, the kind that happen naturally when people lose respect for someone, the kind that unfold quietly at first, then all at once. Doors begin closing. People hesitate to respond. Invitations stop appearing. Opportunities disappear. Their image deteriorates faster than they can repair it. Their credibility shrinks to dust. Their explanations start sounding like excuses. Their attempts to regain sympathy fall flat. Their voice loses its influence. Their claims lose their weight. Their narrative loses its grip. This is the collapse that begins when people stop believing a liar. And strangers no longer believe them. Acquaintances no longer believe them. Even their own circles start sensing the truth. Because the mask isn't slipping anymore, it's been tossed into the shredder. Let's go deeper into what's happening behind the scenes. As people defend you publicly, more people become curious. Curiosity leads to investigation. Investigation leads to revelation. Revelation leads to patterns. Patterns lead to conclusions. And conclusions lead to exposure. People start comparing stories from different times. People start recognizing that this person always had a victim narrative ready. People start realizing they always exaggerated events. People start noticing the lingering trail of conflict they leave everywhere they go. People start seeing that you were the anomaly. You weren't the cause of the tension. You were simply the one who refused to participate. Someone says, "Wait a minute. didn't they have an issue with someone else last year? Another replies, yeah, and before that, too. Someone else says, it's like every few months they have a new villain. Another adds, maybe they're the common denominator. That sentence is a psychological guillotine. Once people realize someone is the recurring problem in every story they tell, their entire narrative collapses. And that's exactly what's happening. The fifth wave, silent accountability. This is where people begin distancing themselves from the toxic one without announcing it. They unfollow quietly. They stop engaging. They stop entertaining drama. They stop responding. They stop supporting. They stop validating. And the toxic one feels that shift like a cold wind hitting their chest. Silence from others is the loudest punishment for someone who thrives on attention. And they'll panic. Oh, they will absolutely panic. You'll see it in their attempts to reclaim control. You'll see it in the sudden shift in tone. You'll see it in the frantic way they try to rewrite the story. You'll see it in the desperation embedded in their words. You'll see it in the sudden attempts to seem calmer, kinder, softer. You'll see it in the strategic posting. You'll see it in the dramatic announcements that conveniently appear at the perfect moment. But it won't work. Not this time. Not now that the truth is public property. Not now that strangers have become your armor. Not now that the narrative belongs to the collective mind, not them. Here's where the dark humor enters again. They'll try to reclaim the mask, but they're wearing it backwards. They'll try to regain sympathy, but they'll overdo it. They'll try to act composed, but the cracks will scream. They'll try to appear unaffected, but their behavior will betray the pressure. They'll try to throw subtle jabs, but people will call them out instantly. They're trapped in a maze of their own creation, and every direction leads to exposure. And as you stay silent, composed, grounded, the contrast becomes blinding. People see the difference between someone who's at peace and someone who's performing stability. They see the difference between someone who lives their truth and someone who fabricates narratives. They see the difference between someone who grows and someone who manipulates. Truth is a mirror. It doesn't lie. And right now, that mirror is being held up by everyone except you. Your role in this? Simply existing. The sixth wave is where the real transformation begins. People begin telling others the truth before your name even enters the conversation. They use your situation as an example. They tell the story from the perspective of someone who learned a lesson in human behavior by witnessing the collapse. Your situation becomes a warning, a lesson, a turning point. Someone says, I used to think they were right, but now I see what actually happened. Another replies, yeah, I saw the way they reacted. It told me everything. Someone else adds, I can't believe I didn't see it before. Another concludes, I'm glad the truth finally came out. This is the shift from exposure to restoration, but the chain reaction isn't done yet. The seventh wave, the one that sets the stage for part 3. That's where consequences move beyond social perception. That's where truth doesn't just circulate, it reorganizes the landscape. That's where people don't just defend you, they reposition you. They rebuild your name. They remove the stain of the lies with deliberate clarity. They elevate your reputation with the same intensity they use to dismantle the toxic one's fabrications. And once the public makes that decision, nothing can reverse it. Nothing can silence it. Nothing can stop it. Because once truth becomes collective memory, the fallout becomes inevitable. And this is the phase that hits the hardest. Because now it's no longer about discovering the truth. It's about institutionalizing it. Watch closely. The moment collective memory shifts, people begin rewriting their internal narratives. Those who once doubted you start editing their recollections. They reinterpret past interactions with you through the new lens of clarity. They tell themselves, "I always sensed something wasn't right about the other person." They convince themselves they saw signs earlier. They adopt this truth as if they were the first ones who realized it. It's human nature. People like feeling perceptive. They like believing they weren't fooled. And so they rewrite their role, positioning themselves on the right side of the story, even if they were late to the realization. But you know what? This works in your favor, because now the same people who once questioned you are advocating for you with impressive confidence. They're reconstructing your image in conversations you'll never hear. They're defending you in circles you'll never see. They're correcting lies in rooms you don't step into. They're explaining your truth as if they were witnesses to everything firsthand. They're praising your composure, your restraint, your dignity. They're calling your silence strength, your patience wisdom, your endurance proof. This is the moment when the crowd doesn't just stand with you. They reframe you. They start describing you as the grounded one, the consistent one, the calm one, the one who didn't break under pressure, the one who didn't crumble in the face of deception, the one who stayed solid even when everything around you was engineered to make you feel unstable. And the toxic one? Well, they become the example, the cautionary tale, the blueprint of what transparency destroys. People talk about them with that tone, the mix of disappointment and disgust, usually reserved for someone who betrayed a communal trust. They use their behavior as evidence in conversations about manipulation. They refer to them in stories where someone says, "This is exactly why you can't always believe the loud one." They hold the toxic one up by the scruff of their downfall and use them as a lesson. You don't realize how powerful this shift is until it becomes widespread. Because once the public gets involved, your restoration becomes a community project, and their exposure becomes a public sport. And that's when something deeper starts happening, something more consequential than people speaking up. People begin questioning every justification the toxic one ever used. Every time they played victim, every time they exaggerated a story, every time they threw your name into a narrative to position themselves as the wounded one, every time they hinted, suggested, implied anything negative about you. It all gets re-examined like forensic evidence, and suddenly, nothing holds up. People remember inconsistencies they overlooked earlier. People recall strange emotional responses. People replay how the toxic one reacted whenever you were mentioned. People notice that their stories never quite aligned with reality. People see the character flaws they once excused. People see the patterns they once rationalized. People see the mask they once trusted. And once that mask is gone, fully, irreversibly gone, every interaction becomes suspicious. Their tone starts sounding insincere. Their emotions seem exaggerated. Their explanations feel manufactured. Their claims feel hollow. Their reactions seem conveniently performative. Their entire persona looks constructed. People start avoiding them, not because they hate them, but because they finally see how much energy this person drains from every environment they enter. They sense the heaviness. They feel the tension. They notice the chaos that seems to follow them. Their presence becomes uncomfortable, like sitting near a candle that flickers just a bit too aggressively. And here is where the real unraveling begins. Because humans don't just reject liars, they isolate them. The toxic one begins losing their grip on social influence. They attempt to explain themselves. but their words lack force. They attempt to defend their actions, but people see arrogance, not innocence. They attempt to regain control of the narrative, but nobody hands it to them. They try to blame you again, but no one listens. They try to paint themselves as misunderstood, but no one buys it. They try to reposition themselves as the victim, but the crowd has already decided. They're the architect of their own downfall. And the public? They're not gentle. They're not lenient. They're not forgiving of deception that was weaponized. People have begun tearing the toxic person's actions apart with the same intensity they use when dismantling a con artist's playbook. They point out micro-expressions. They highlight tone shifts. They analyze their phrasing. They examine patterns of conflict. They look at historical behavior. They drag them into the light they never wanted. This isn't vengeance. This is exposure as a natural consequence. Truth isn't punishing them. Truth is simply refusing to protect them anymore. Let's go deeper. Something profound happens when enough people defend you. The toxic one loses their ability to manipulate anyone. Manipulation requires an audience. It requires believers. It requires people willing to internalize the lies. But now, their audience is gone. Their supporters shrink. Their allies fade. Their enablers disappear. Their storytellers go silent. Their sympathy collectors stop collecting on their behalf. They're surrounded by people who no longer trust their words, and nothing terrifies a manipulator more than losing control of perception. You can almost feel the panic radiating from them. You can see it in their sudden attempts to reconnect with old contacts. You can see it in their frantic desire to rebuild their image. You can see it in their desperate confusion as they try to understand how the narrative escaped their control. You can see it in the way they analyze every new comment online, searching for signs of support that no longer exist. You can see it in the way they lash out indirectly, hoping to trigger sympathy. But all of it backfires. Every attempt to look composed comes across as calculated. Every attempt to play victim looks exaggerated. Every attempt to blame others looks transparent. Every attempt to downplay their actions looks guilty. They become a spectacle, not because people enjoy watching them fall, but because the unraveling is so predictable and yet so unavoidable. And all of this is happening because strangers decided to protect you. Those strangers, they're not going anywhere. They've become more invested than you realize. They're watching the fallout with hawk-like focus. They're screenshotting everything. They're calling out contradictions before you even see them. They're dragging toxic behavior into the light with a precision that feels almost personal. They're publicly correcting any lie that dares to surface. They're protecting your name as if it's a mission. You don't understand how powerful this is yet. Because once strangers collectively decide you were wronged, your reputation becomes untouchable. People defend you without thinking. People trust you instinctively. People assume your innocence even before knowing the story. People treat you as the steady one, the grounded one, the one who didn't crumble or retaliate. Truth has elevated you beyond your own effort. But let's talk about what this does to the toxic one's world. Because it's not just social distancing, it's collapse from every angle. Their connections begin to question them. Their support network shrinks to a fragile thread. Their confidence fractures. Their self-image crumbles. Their attempts to regain power fail in real time. Their stories don't land the way they used to. Their charm doesn't work anymore. Their excuses fall flat. Their arrogance evaporates. Their manipulative lines sound repetitive and predictable. And the more they try to fight the exposure, the deeper the exposure goes. Because people start digging, people start investigating, people start examining old interactions, people start talking to each other privately, people start sharing stories, people start recognizing long-term patterns, people start realizing the truth was always there, they just didn't see it clearly until now. This destroys the toxic one more than any consequence ever could. Because people don't just distrust them, they study them. They treat them like a case file. They analyze their motives. They decipher their behavior. They decode their lies. And when someone becomes a case study, they can't manipulate anyone anymore. The worst part for them? Your absence speaks louder than their presence. You're not fighting. You're not arguing. You're not exposing. You're not reacting. You're not engaging. Your stillness is the loudest statement, because people expect the guilty to panic, not the innocent. Your calm contradicts their chaos. Your composure contradicts their desperation. Your growth contradicts their downfall. Your stability contradicts their unraveling. You became the evidence they cannot discredit. Your existence is proof. Your peace is proof. Your progress is proof. Your evolution is proof. While their behavior becomes the confession, let's break down the next stage. What happens when the truth becomes common knowledge, not just shared in pockets of conversation? This is where consequences transcend social dynamics and begin shaping the toxic one's entire trajectory. People stop giving them opportunities. People stop trusting their leadership. People stop inviting them to collaborate. People stop recommending them. People stop sheltering them. People stop believing anything they say without verification. Their name begins triggering caution. Their reputation becomes a warning sign. Their presence evokes discomfort. Their energy feels unsafe to others. This is not personal, it's psychological. Humans avoid those who create disruption. Humans reject those who distort reality. Humans distance themselves from those who create conflict. Humans protect themselves from patterns that feel dangerous. In one swift shift, the public moves from defending you to protecting themselves from the toxic person. And once humans enter that self-preservation mode, they do not reverse course. Now comes something even more brutal. Truth is no longer content with revealing who they really are. Truth now begins revealing who you really are. People notice your resilience. People admire your restraint. People praise your composure. People respect your silence. People trust your steadiness. People value your authenticity. People recognize your growth. And they express it openly. They defend you without hesitation. They uplift your name without being asked. They shut down toxicity within seconds. They correct anyone who tries to distort the truth. They remove the toxic person's influence and amplify yours. You become the center of gravity, not because you fought for it, not because you argued your case, not because you demanded anything, but because truth reorganized the social environment around you. You didn't rise, you were elevated. You didn't restore your reputation. The public did it for you. You didn't expose the toxic one. Their contradictions exposed them. You didn't seek justice. Justice sought you. And now, we enter the final stage of this transformation, the reconstruction of your narrative. Not the narrative they tried to force on you. Not the narrative that once wounded you. Not the narrative that revolved around their lies. Your true narrative. People see you differently now. Not as someone who endured chaos, but as someone who transcended it. Not as someone who was manipulated, but as someone whose clarity is now undeniable. Not as someone who was targeted, but as someone whose authenticity triggered exposure. Not as someone who lost, but as someone who was vindicated.